So we're going to do a little bit of unpacking and maybe repacking a little bit for the next 20 minutes or so. And we will have some opportunity for some questions from the audience as well. But we might start. We can stay flexible, and so if a question comes up, by all means, feel free to present the question. But I'd like to start with just calling out some of the terms that are being bandied around a lot these days, and see if you can help us understand what they mean and maybe where we need to nudge them. Women and men alike are struggling with terms and practices of toxic masculinity, mansplaining, patriarchy, dominance. Can we talk a little bit about what this means in our contemporary context, and perhaps how do we transform that language?
I'll start. Well, first of all, I'm on a personal campaign. I don't know if everybody was here for the morning session. My daughter is Lila June Johnston, and she was talking about, Thank you for Thank you for receiving my beautiful daughter the way that you did. Thank you. But she was talking about, that wounded masculine. And so what we know, what I learned in my studies of the witch hunts was that it wasn't just the women who were damaged in that. And it took me quite a while to see that. As soon as we say witch hunt, we think of the women. But actually, the sacred masculine was deeply, deeply damaged in that as well. Because, from indigenous perspective, one of the core spiritual principles for the sacred masculine is to protect life, to protect life and to provide for life, to provide for the women, children, and elders. And so in that instance, that wasn't possible. There were so many men who would have done anything to be able to keep their wife from being destroyed, their daughter, their mother, their friend, etc., and they weren't able to do that. And when that happens for a man, my daughter talks about this a lot, it's a violation of a man, especially for a young boy who has to witness their mother being violated in any time, modern time, that it changes them on the inside. And oftentimes what that will do is will lead for them to be a perpetrator of violence, or else it will completely flatten their fire, their drive, that actor as masculine. And so so we know that from indigenous culture, because our men were not able to protect during that onslaught of attempted genocide. So it changed our men. It's also being explored very deeply in African American culture here in the United States, right? Mm-hmm. And so we know that changes them. And so I have a lot of compassion for Men's Nation, huge compassion that I didn't have before I went into the exploration of the witch hunts. But so I'm on this campaign now to really think about that word patriarchy. And what I'm saying now is because you've already heard that first part of this conversation, which I'm talking about the power over paradigm, that's the patriarchy. Mm-hmm. It's not masculine. It's not men. It does not equal men. So I'm on a campaign every time I hear it to say, patriarchy does not equal men. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's so important for us to start to get that, I think. Mm-hmm. Try to be brief here. At Bioneers, I got to hear Eve Ensler speak. Now, if you go hear Eve Ensler speak, you're probably going to get a little confrontation about gender going on, for sure. But she said something, and I'm sure, I don't know that this originated with her, but I just happened to hear her say it. And she said, when we because we're story-based beings, when we don't have a narrative for something, it becomes largely invisible to us. Because we are story-based beings, when we don't have a narrative for something, it becomes largely invisible to us. And so I feel like part of what we're doing here is providing a narrative for something that's floating around, but we haven't been able to grasp it. So good for us, right? Yeah. But what I realize is we've begun to create a narrative of the sacred feminine in all different versions. Some of them I struggle with, I have to admit. But we don't have a narrative for the sacred masculine. Mm-hmm. Almost at all. And so I'm making it a personal campaign to begin to talk, to give language, to give the traits, to bear witness to what is this when we talk about sacred masculine. And so I think that what you're describing, the mansplaining and patriarchy, I'm looking for that flip side of that coin and looking to say, so one of the things that I say about it is, so if the woman is the dreaming and the masculine is the waker of the dreaming egg, first of all, and if the masculine have a willingness to receive that dream as part of community, then I'm also going to call that sacred masculine an architect of the fulfillment of the vision of the dreaming egg, oftentimes. So that's where I'm moving so far.
And what you're saying reminds me, I guess, of two connected things, and that is how gender is constructed, right? When you said that the voice you heard said that what we know about masculine and feminine energies, we only know in a power over structure, and it would be so different in a power with structure, right? So what we know about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, what it means to be feminine, what it means to be masculine, we know primarily through a power over structure, but that's not the only way to know what it means. And that part of that is this, I'm always very interested in those who merge and straddle our categories, right? So that part of confronting gender, right, and part of of looking at the names is for those for whom it doesn't work, right? For those who identify as non-binary, right? Or for whom saying, the gender categories that have been given, I want to break through them. They don't make sense. They don't fit. That there are cultures and communities who are fine with those constructions and have always and long had ways and places and understandings that don't fit into like this or that, or say we all have different kinds of feminine, we all have different kinds of masculine, and we live along these spectrums, sometimes in one day, not just in one life, right, of how much we embody and how much we show forth. And so I kind of want to push that part too, right, that these are constructed, which is great because that means we can reconstruct them, right, in ways that are healthier, in ways that are power with than the ones we've inherited.
Mm-hmm. The thing that I think I would add is I get sad when I hear those words now, because I realize some of this comes from the Haas Center for Social Inclusion. And basically we're living in a time of very, very rapid change. And the change is happening on a gender spectrum, and it's happening on a race spectrum, and it's happening on a faith spectrum, and it's happening on an economic spectrum. And typically when humans are faced with really rapid change, we tend to have one of two reactions. We either other, and we say, oh, we're not like them, and we blame them, or which we see tons of coming from the White House all the way through society. Or we focus on belonging. And really as social creatures, we want to be in a modality of how do we welcome everyone in. And I'm so aware, I got really kind of emotional listening to that, just because I realize how alienating it must be for men to hear those words now, and how much actually as women we have the benefit of several generations of women working on gender identity and equity and what does it mean to reclaim the feminine, that men don't have in the same way. And I'm more and more acutely aware that with the dire situations that we face, both socially and ecologically, if we don't find a good way to include and welcome everyone in and invite the men to be full feminists and to embrace it and to understand that being feminist doesn't mean women on top, it means the circle, the hoop that Woman Stands Shining is describing, we may not make it. We need everyone in. And so how do we welcome everyone in?
I'm tempted to kind of just take on this this paradigm and how do we go to shifting the triangle to the circle. And I wonder, do you have any thoughts on that? For people who are leaving the theater in about 20 minutes?
You know, I would offer one thing. I'm actually reading a book that's really influencing me right now, and it's Margaret Wheatley's latest book. And I think it's called Who Do We Choose to Be? And she talks about, she contexts this moment that we're in within two contexts, one of which is living systems and how living systems thrive and how they need to remain open and flexible and transformative in order to survive. But the other one is this historical context of how humans have behaved at the ends of empire through 3,000 years of human history. And it's fascinating because so much of what we're seeing right now is suddenly becomes revealed as a pattern. And she says we need to create islands of sanity. And we do that, you know, we do that partly by insisting on love and truth, as Lila June said so beautifully this morning, love and truth being able to coexist. And I love what Bell Hooks says about insisting on the primacy of love. I may be paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it. And, you know, I think we create those circles of sacred hoop and community and belonging everywhere we go. And not easy, but doable. And it's the communities and the life I want to live is doing that rather than the other, you know? So what do you two think?
I mean, yes. You know, how do we change the world when we leave?
Yeah, right.
I mean, and I think, you know, kind of, we say it, but I think it's true. It's like we change ourselves, and we change our households, and we change our neighborhoods first, right? Yeah. So how much do we operate in a triangle in our minds, right, with our families? And then how do we make that a circle, right? Which is hard, actually, when you've been raised in triangle thinking, right? It means, you know, you in the hoop, in a circle, you see yourself reflected back to you, like all your great qualities and all your not so great qualities. You know, you see coming back to you. You see, how do I live a circle in a triangle world, right? And you know, I mean, I always say feng shui is about how to make like a square house have roundhouse energy, right? You curve out the edges. I'm like, because people like round houses, teepees round, igloos round, yurts round, right? And so we try to round out our edges, and with our children, with our parents, with our neighbors, I think. And that's where it's hardest, right? How do you share and barter there? How do you give up power and receive power there, right? And I mean, I've been trying this in my household, and sometimes I'm like, everybody out, right? Leave me alone at the top of the triangle. Why aren't you listening to me? My power over, I say to my child, right? You know, then I calm down and, you know, go back to the round like a couple hours later. Days.
I love how you said it's hard, but it's you know, I mean, I feel like I've been in a process of peeling back layers that I call decolonizing my mind and heart, you know, of that triangle system, because I keep finding it in myself, and I go deeper, and there it is again, and there it is again, and it's yucky. But it's like I have to look at it, and I have to have community who can reflect it back to me and go through the nauseating experience of going, ooh, yeah, that's in me too. And how am I going to excavate it so I can choose to live differently? Right?
Yeah, I think what I've been working on is getting a lot more comfortable in the unknown. Because, you know, I think in my circles that I hang out in, we feel pretty clear that there's a lot that has to change. And so the thing about change is that things change. And and it's mighty uncomfortable. It's mighty uncomfortable. I mean, I can talk, even what I just had to say, I feel like that was sort of a download to me, and so I'm working on it. It's not that I got that all figured out. I'm working on it, but I heard it. I heard that truth in it, and so I'm willing to say, I open myself to be available. So this is my practice in the morning. Is I open myself to be available for the highest possibility for life, light, and love today, and hopefully tomorrow, and the next day too. And so I acknowledge that I don't know that I know what that is. I think we're coming upon it. And to be honest, I don't know that it's like this stationary thing that's sitting out there that we just have to like arrive to. I think it is being created right now. One thing that I say is that, we hear about indigenous people's creation stories, right? And I, for a long time, viewed them as sort of being like in the past. But guess what? We're still telling the creation story right here, right now. Because we're co-creating this life. I feel like in my practice, what I have heard is from spirit is you people can have it any way you want it. And right now you're saying you want it like this. And so, what else might you want? Just wondering, and so it really, it puts that back to me to think about what kind of thought structure, what kind of belief system am I operating in? I had a conversation with somebody sitting next to me yesterday. This has been a big question for me at interfaith gatherings, is because I was raised in this Dutch Christian Reformed church that my family was sent to into their residential boarding schools. And so I feel like I have understood some of the doctrine and actually the dogma involved in that. And I say, so in these interfaith gatherings, how can you put that aside, the part about the evangelism, the part about, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to make you like me. And that's my difficulty with interfaith. But I'm showing up. Here I am, right?
Thank you.
And the man next to me had a really great thing to say, which is that there's an evolution going on, at least from his perspective, in certain branches of Christianity, and I could recognize, and he talked about the persecution of those things. And I thought, guess what? That happens where I live too. Who knew that, my presence even being here, being broadcast wherever, is going to create some difficulties for some people somewhere. And so, I have to have that willingness to step out into that mystery. One other thing that I've been told is that I am responsible for placing myself before the truth frequently. I was told that I was born into so many lies that the fact that I can perceive truth at all is a miracle. So this is layers and layers and layers of this noodle gone wild with constructing things. And this whole creation is not only about what comes out of the human mind. And I worry for all my relatives living in deep urban centers because they're constantly being confronted back only with what comes out of this. And that, to me, isn't going to lead us to life necessarily. So I have to recognize where I am. So to place myself before the truth frequently is partly like what we're doing right here, right now, opening, hearing, blooming, that vulnerability. But also it's going out into nature for me, and placing myself there. So I'm having to, for me, I'm saying that truth equals life. If it's leading to life, if it's supporting life, if it's moving towards life, then I'm going to call it truth. Because I feel like we are coming to that place where we're going to have to ask, do we want to live? Do we really want to live? Because if we do, we got to pay attention to how this construct works. So that's why I think they're saying you are responsible for placing yourself before the truth frequently.
So is there a timekeeper that I can... Do we have time for another follow-up? Yeah? Okay. So Can you all share some of the perhaps models that you've come across that are those seeds of hope, places that we might look for reference going forward, places where the feminine has been reinfused and balance is being restored?
I don't know if I can talk about a place. I can talk about a couple of ideas. I think one of the things that I've really learned from 12 years of deep dives with amazing women and cultivating women's leadership has been that one of the really profound capacities of women and the feminine is to strengthen each other in community. You know, that it's like the Dina story, that Dina goes out to look for her sisters, and I thought, yeah, I know what that feels like. And that when women are really in authentic, honest, and committed alignment, we have this capacity to grow each other like crazy. So that's one thing I would offer. Another is related to the title of this session, which I was realizing, confronting gender. I kind of have an issue with it, so I just have to speak it out loud, which is that...
And you're not alone. Everyone that heard the title had the same reaction.
Oh, good, okay. Well, I had a profound learning about 6 years ago. I got bitten by a spider in my bed, and I didn't think anything of it. It was not a big deal. Spiders happen all the time in New Mexico, but a few months later, it turned into a crater, and I started paying attention. And at one point, I went to a woman who's indigenous and a sometimes mentor teacher of mine, and I said, what do you think, her name is Oki Simony Forrest, and I said, what do you think this spider bite is meant to teach me? And she said, and the spider bite's right on my front of my right shin, and she said, I think Grandmother Spider is teaching you not to keep meeting conflict from your masculine side. And so this is something that relates to your last question, actually. And I kind of sat up and I felt myself get really curious. And I said, what does that mean?
Say it again, what she said.
She said, the spider bite is teaching you not to meet conflict from your masculine side. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, well, the masculine meets conflict with aggression and force and power and might makes right. And, you know, immediate, hard confrontation. And she said the feminine meets conflict very differently. She said the feminine meets conflict. Imagine how grass grows through the concrete or how a river cuts through a canyon. She said the feminine meets conflict with gentle but persevering and flexible pressure. And I was like, oh, wow, that's so different. And it relates to that, how do we transition from the triangle space to the hoop? I think that because we're all products of a culture that has prioritized the triangle for so long, we tend to behave in masculinized forms and think in masculinized stories without questioning, like, what are the alternatives? What's the other dream we could be having? And so for me, that's a mantra of sorts, is how to meet conflict from my feminine side. Because I think our challenge is to wrap around culture and transform it in an inclusive, loving way, rather than in a confronting way.
Oh. I can think of two examples, I guess, to come back to where I started. I've mentioned I've been telling the story of Dina for 20 years. I've been telling it, I'm a survivor of sexual violence. I've been telling it as a minister and faith leader who has been trying to teach other clergy and ministers in training how we can change our churches and our religious communities to address and to hear the survivors of sexual violence and those who experience sexual violence, which are also those who love them in many ways. And so, and it happens, right? I mean, it's not great, but if you compare 20 years ago, right? These are stories people tell. You have hashtags. There are no hashtags of Me Too or Church Too, right? People are telling stories. Stories are being heard. Stories are being believed. People are, there's so much more to go, but I guess I think of where I've seen it come
Yeah.
from, that there are churches, like individual churches, sometimes small, sometimes large, that have programs and ways to help, talk about teen dating violence, consensual touch with kids, ways to heal, ways to wrestle with some of our hardest ideas about God and forgiveness and reconciliation, or not, in the context of these bodily and psychic wounds. And so in those places, I see, right, us listening for Dinas and looking for Dinas, and being willing to hear the voice of those who are like, yeah, me too, right? Which is where it comes from. Just this, I can't tell the whole story, but I know, right? That kind of knowledge. In the other place, thinking particularly of traditional African religions, and how they are practiced, and this is still greatly evolving, but they're ones that they haven't had problems with women's leadership the way some other traditions have had, right? That there are priests and there are priestesses, there are babalaos and there are yalarishas, and in leadership, where you have, your Oshun, who's a woman, can be a warrior when she needs to be, right? Just like our mama bear instincts can be. It's like loving mama, but hey, if you're going to keep me from feeding the children, I'm going to turn into a warrior, right? That have ways of straddling our ideas about gender and feminine and masculine, and that at least more in the U.S., they're less persecuted, right? They're still quieter, they're still smaller. But there are still parts of the world where these traditions are persecuted, right? Where people, there are the kinds of burnings, the kicking over the shrines. I'm thinking of recent articles in Bahia, Brazil, right? But here, we're doing better. I remember being a teenager and reading about these stories where there were just these huge court cases over, can you kill a chicken in the city? And now you can have eggs in the backyard, right? We're getting better, I think, at a kind of inclusivity, a kind of less persecution of saying we need to hear the wisdom. That there is something that we've lost, or something we should pay attention to. We at least cannot keep stomping down, right? The wisdom of those who are coming from these places that honor, I think, women's wisdom in different ways.
Well, I feel like what has been coming to me hasn't been very valuable, needed, or received for quite some time. And now suddenly here I sit, right? And so where someone's asking me, well, what do you think about this? And so one, I want to point out that, what I keep saying to folks is, if you've tried it and it hasn't been met, try it again. Try it again, because a level of willingness is arising, and I'm going to propose that openness and that level of willingness is going to keep increasing. In some places, it's going to shut down tighter, but in many, many places, as we begin to witness the changes that are coming down, we're going to start to see a lot more willingness. So for those of you who have already been holding that place, so maybe you're not out there looking for where do I go, but you've been like holding, I'm just with you, and I'm saying that I think that place will come for what you hold. And so for the Women's Nation, I say that we've been talked out so deeply in so many ways, but in particular, I'm going to pick on Western medicine for a minute, of what our bodies hold in relation to the well-being of our human community. And so we've been talked out of our moon time. We're not to talk about it, we're not to show it, we're not to say anything, and you're supposed to go and act like nothing is happening. Even though everything is happening, right? I mean, we're talking about 50% of the population is going through this, and yet somehow we're supposed to be like, no, I'm fine, And I want to tell you that part of my experiment was to go in for a job interview and to say to them, 4 days out of the month I will not be here, but you will not regret it. You will be blessed by the time that I take. And I'm not just talking about my crabbiness. I'm talking about the gifts that are going to come on behalf of the organization that I'm giving my heart and soul to. And I got hired.
All right.
Okay? So there's that. And just briefly, I mean, I talk for this stuff for like 3 days in a row, so this is very brief. But for the elder women who are beyond that time, so again, I'll go back to that time of if you just make a little space, this is not the elder women, this is the younger women, the menstruating women, if you just make the smallest space to say, I acknowledge that at this time I'm dismantling the holy altar of life. Mama Earth, from which all this life is constantly blasting. I mean, that's the whole plan, right? The whole plan, if we look around, everything else around us is doing one thing. It's making more life, making more life, making more life, making more life. That's got to be the plan. I'm pretty sure that must be it. And yet here we are, the five-fingered ones going, you know, what is this all about? And and so I'm going to say that if you participate as that female of saying, you know, I'm dismantling the holy altar of life, Mom, and I'm being with you, and I'm willing to receive you, it can be that simple, and you will be surprised at what comes around. There's an order to her that you become a part of and that you begin to express to your community. As the elder woman, what I've been told is that the grandmother's lodges have to be reinstated on this Mother Earth. They have to be reinstated. So for me, what I was told during my menopausal time was, you are birthing yourself again. You're in labor. That's why it feels that way. You are in labor again, and this time you're going to birth yourself as the fruitful woman. The woman who has this knowledge. Now, picture that if you had sat for every one of your moon times and made this inquiry to the Mother Earth, say I started at 11 years old and I finished at about 48, so what is that, like about 37 years? 37 years of months of receiving instruction from the Mother Earth. Oh, girl, you know? I am a force to be reckoned with. I am a precious resource for my community. So young women, you can see where this is going. For the elder women, I'm sorry, it's hard, it's painful to hear this when we pass that, but you can talk to the young women about it. But I also just want to honor you for the place that you're in. The grandmother's lodge is the counterbalance to the masculine leadership. And in some of the nations, they say that the elder woman chooses the men's leadership because they knew those men when they were little boys, and they know what their natures are like. So imagine if the President of the United States was chosen by the grandmother's lodge. We would have a different world, right? And to the men's nation, I want to say to you, you are precious and you are holy. You are precious and you are holy. You are that sacred fire. Your eros, which is under deep question at the moment. You know, I had to say to myself, you know, each of us is designed in that holy hoop of life we have a perfect design for thriving life. And that must mean that masculine has that too. The men have that too. And that eros has to be a part of it. It's so prominent in their sacredness and their biology. So how can I say to you, could you please have your fire burn at just the minimum? Because that will make me feel a little better. So I have to say, that can't be it. That can't be it. And something needs to be done about that fire. So in our culture, for the men keeping sacred fire for the women, or for anybody, there's a way that we keep sacred fire. We don't want wildfire just burning all over everything. That doesn't serve life. But there is a way to hold it and keep it. And there's even a way that you think while you're holding and keeping that sacred fire that makes everything sing. And there has to be a way for the whole community to be in support of that fire that the men are carrying. That fire is what's driving our life forward. That fire is what ensures that life is going to go forward. And if the plan is life, that makes that a sacred medicine. So, thank you. I'm sorry that I've misunderstood you for so long, Men's Nation. But I'm coming around. I'm coming around, and I love you.
Announcements?
Oh.